ngobrolnya agak sedikit berbisik jadi kurang gitu.
Good morning, and welcome to another edition to the Jakarta-Post talk show, a Jak-Post Spotlight. Today we will talk about expanding investment amid geopolitical conflicts. I'm Divya Kariza, and I will be your host for the next hour. The Indonesian government has noted the important contribution of investment towards the country's economy and is committed to improving competitiveness and investment climate for both local and foreign investment. However, the onslaught of political tensions rising in Europe and Asia has the potential to hinder foreign direct investment, while government regulations at regional levels remain as a distinct challenge because of the many procedures and requirements that are time-consuming and costly, even under the new law. Before we begin, I'd like to remind our audience to fill in a feedback form by scanning the QR code that appears on screen or by clicking the link in the chat box. Today, we are delighted to be joined by an esteemed panel of experts to discuss the investment opportunities in the evolving economic climate in Indonesia. Here we have Pak Indra Darmawan, the Investment Ministry's Deputy Minister for Investment Planning. Pak Indra has a PhD in philosophy and a doctoral in economics from Flinders University, Australia, as well as a Master of Science from the London School of Economics. Prior to joining the Investment Ministry, he worked at the National Development Planning Agency, handling regional sector planning, natural resources, and the environment. Welcome to the studio, Pak Indra.
Thank you for having me, Divya. Thank you.
Next, we have Pak Andry Asmoro, Chief Economist at Bank Mandiri, serving as Department Head of Macroeconomics and Financial Market Research. With over 20 years of experience in the financial sector, Pak Andry is also a Senior Research Associate at the Institute for Economic and Social Research, Faculty of Economics and Business, University of Indonesia. And he also holds a Master's of Economics from Georgia State University. Good to have you with us, Pak Andry.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, thank you so much. Before we proceed, I'd like to invite the audience to send in some questions through the Q&A box in Zoom. And also, please don't forget to state who you are addressing your questions to. As briefly mentioned before, the world is steadily heading towards what could be more than a year of geopolitical conflicts. Now, the question is, how will it impact the investment climate in Indonesia? So we'll jump right in. To Pak Andry, how has the investment climate in Indonesia evolved in the past years?
Yeah, I think if we take a look on the numbers and also the climate, it's getting better and better, every year. So many investors that we met actually mentioned that Indonesia is now improved quite significantly. And we can see from the number, for example, the direct investment from the Ministry of Investment data, it continued accelerating in the third quarter 2022. Driven mostly by foreign direct investment. So one most interesting point is that the foreign direct investment also actually broke the record in the third quarter of 2022. I think this is something that we have to understand. Without any improvement in business climate in Indonesia, I think foreign direct investors will questioning when they want to invest in Indonesia. And the challenge is quite a lot. For example, many Asian countries also want to try to grab the investment performance and also investment money coming into their countries. And Indonesia still posted with a stellar figure. I think it's a good sign that the investment climate in Indonesia is actually improving. The confidence coming in from, I think, the leadership in the Ministry of Investment as well, how they handle actually the daily investment problems, for example, on the ground, not just by rhetoric of the macro narrative, but already coming in or jumping in to tackle all the business climate problem in regions, for example, not only talking about the macro or national level, but also how to coordinate between the national level to the local or region level. I think that's my view.
Okay, that's really amazing. Perhaps Pak Indra, Pak Andry mentioned about the stellar investment climate in Indonesia, its performance this year. How much do you think the job creation law play a role in encouraging such outcome this year?
Indeed, the role of the job creation law or the omnibus
Yes.
is pretty big, actually. It simplifies procedures. It helps many people to start the business much, much easier. So to start the business today in Indonesia is way much easier than before. So you just log in to the electronic platform of the OSS, and then you can go ahead if you're if you're dealing in a very simple business and the risk is categorized by the system as low. You just fill up your basic data and then you just go ahead with your business without a license. So that is one of the attractiveness of starting a business in Indonesia, as also generated by the omnibus law. So 79 laws squeezed into one, and then almost 1,000 regulation also deleted and incorporated into one new simple platforms. As of today, every day we issued around 7,000 of business identification number. So it's quite huge, actually. Of course, it is not perfect, actually, but at least we can produce that number on daily basis. That shows that people right now entering into business in a way much more easier. And that is the role of the omnibus for that.
Okay, thank you so much. It is interesting how you said that it is not perfect yet, but it is a huge improvement in helping boost investment in Indonesia. Perhaps you could share a little bit more about how much progress do implementing the regulation now is taking place in Indonesia right now in terms of the derivative regulations. Perhaps you can share more on that.
Yeah, the omnibus come with lots of derivative regulation, and that is also creating more and more implementing regulation aim to strengthen and aim to simplify lots of things. At the beginning, we encountered some sort of how to navigate into that labyrinth of rules and regulation, previous rules and regulations, both at the central and at the regional level. And then came the judiciary review, which requests the regulator to improve on the method and improve on the process. We did that already. So right now, we improve those aspects as stipulated, as requested by the Constitutional Court. So much more improvement have already been made, and we are now ready to relaunch again the omnibus for the better.
Okay, perfect. Perhaps Pak Andry could add more about. Pak Indra talked a lot about how the job creation law is improving the ease of doing business. Perhaps in terms, what about the investment incentives that the government is implementing right now? How effective are those incentives in attracting and encouraging potential investors to invest in Indonesia?
Yeah, of course, the government incentives is very important, for many investors coming in to Indonesia, because other countries also offer government incentives quite a lot. For example, so the competition is very tight, like I mentioned before. When we talk about the government incentive, of course, the government incentive is a comprehensive incentive. Not only the tax, for example, but also how to manage their raw materials. For example, the easiness of importing the raw materials from their countries, for example, to be re-exported to other countries. But other than other than the government incentive, of course, the investors requires many structural fundamental issues, yeah, to be tackled by the government, of course. Number one, when we talk about the law enforcement, I think, so that's actually the basic prerequisite, yeah, for the investors to coming in to one country, including Indonesia. For example, like I mentioned before earlier, so for example, the coordination of the regulation between the central government and the local governments, for example. So the regulation should be in line. So when I open or I come to Indonesia and invest in Indonesia, I only deal with one regulation, for example, yeah. And actually, it's like Pak Indra mentioned, it's already tackled by the law, omnibus law, yeah, for example. And number two, I think that's actually not only government incentive, but also the readiness of the talents, yeah, or the human resources in one country. Of course, when we are opening, for example, investment in one country, big opportunity coming in, for example, for the local people to get a job in that. But we, of course, they have certain requirements, yeah, to, for example, based on the skills and so on and so forth. So that's actually beyond the Ministry of Investment to tackle on these issues, together with the Ministry of Labor, for example, Ministry of Education in that. So if the investors seeing that Indonesian labor, yeah, or human resources is well enough to be, to be absorbed by the investors, I think it's easier for them all to come in. Okay, I don't have any issues on this. So that's number two. Number three, I think the easiness of course, the support from for example, investors to get the raw materials. Of course, they want to get it, the resources, and then they want to jump in and they want to produce right away, for example. So that's actually what the investors need to invest in one country beyond on the government incentive. But the government incentive is actually the basic, yeah, when they want to go to one country, for example, because many countries right now offer the government incentives. But other than that, I think we have to also prepare beyond the government incentive. Okay, so.
Okay, that's awesome. That's really interesting insights that you mentioned about the readiness of our human resources to seize the opportunities that the government is trying to get in Indonesia. And Pak Indra has previously mentioned that, okay, the government is trying to with the job creation law to harness that and make that path forward. Perhaps both Pak Indra and Pak Andry can share a little bit about the outlook for 2023 amidst the expected inflation and the economic uncertainty. How ready is the Indonesian investment climate to face those challenges next year?
To Pak Indra or me?
Perhaps to Pak Indra.
Divya, can I just, it is very interesting, can I just take a little bit step back to that omnibus before talking about 2023, because this is important to add what Pak Andry just said. The biggest challenge for that, the implementation of the omnibus law is not technical. Technical is easy. It's kind of software development, and then you can move forward with a better version. But the biggest challenge for that is the mindset. How to change the culture. How to change the culture toward a more serving, towards a more open, toward a more better system of licensing. We know exactly that with that omnibus implementation, many people, many parties, many institutions will lose power. And that is not easy at all for people who lose power or who think they are not as powerful as before, be it as a ministry or be it as a regional government. So it also creates some sort of problem of motivation. motivation for them to move forward together toward the better end. We have to have a similar motivation to move forward together. If some party is not very motivational to join the movement, it will be a great challenge. So I think that is also one of the greatest challenges that we still carry forward to the 2023. So now I'm talking about 2023. So so far, if we look at the situation 3 years back, I think the situation of the macroeconomy of Indonesia is not too bad at all. On the economic growth rate, we managed to not fall behind 5%. Of course, we experienced, as many countries also experienced during the 2020s, a really bad year in the minus 2%, and then rebound and then bounce back to the level of the pre-pandemic. So that is something that we have to also be proud of, because compared to other countries, we experiencing some quite good improvement. So managing the economic growth of 5% or beyond is also the result of hard works from us, and also probably a little bit of luck from the windfall of the commodity prices at the global scale. So there are three major challenges ahead of us in 2023 that we have to pay attention to. First is the geopolitics. So I read the survey by McKinsey. They asked about 700 CEO, what's on top of your mind? And ranking number one is geopolitics. So global CEO right now have geopolitics on top of their mind. So every time they wake up in the morning, they think about situation in Ukraine, they think about situation in the gas prices in Europe, the inflation in US, and the COVID-19 policy in China. So those are the three main challenges: the inflation in America, development in Europe, and as well as the COVID, the management of COVID in China. It might not be a recession as some of the analysts predicted. It is going to be a slow demand coming up next year. And how to respond to that slower demand is also the greatest challenge. That slower demand will be exacerbated by high inflation rate and also the high interest rate from many central banks trying to combat that high inflation rate. This will definitely affect the balance sheet of corporation, big and small. So many corporations who have a big debt denominated in US dollar will be very cautious. So 2023, the tone will be in Bahasa Indonesia is optimis tapi waspada. So it's very optimist. There are some degree of optimism, but you have to be cautious in some aspect.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Indra, for your insights. Unfortunately, that was we must conclude our first session of the discussion. Thank you so much for the speakers. Next, we'll be addressing what awaits us amid an expected economic uncertainty. But before that, let's hear a word from our sponsor, the Investment Ministry. We'll be back for our second session soon.
Hari ini Indonesia telah memasuki babak baru di mana transformasi ekonomi yang memadukan teknologi terbaru untuk menciptakan nilai tambah sumber daya alam. Menumbuhkan optimisme baru bisnis Indonesia dengan berbagai regulasi dari hulu hingga hilir. Hari ini juga Indonesia telah masuk pada babak baru tentang menuju kepada ekonomi hijau. Energi baru terbarukan adalah sesuatu yang harus dilaksanakan untuk memberikan kontribusi terbaiknya bagi dunia.
印尼政策的变化，我们感觉到非常满意。然后这里的投资让我们更有信心，我们觉得在这里投资更安全。
The transformation of investment policy in Indonesia has changed considerably and is optimistic that the government's commitment will ensure for business sustainably.
Especially human resource, natural resource, all is very important for investor. Indonesia have many attractive investment packages.
As a long-term investor in Indonesia, we have seen transformational change in the ease of doing business and investing in Indonesia. This has made us even more confident to expand our business and at the same time involve small and local medium-sized enterprises, Indonesian companies, to join in our expansion of our business in Indonesia.
Demand support was provided by the Indonesian government to give investor easy access. Where we have two terminals here. One is a terminal car, another is a containers terminal, where we are going to be run operationally commercials on 2024.
We want to serve and reach satisfaction together with our investors.
今回の変革により、インドネシアの投資はもっと進むと思います。
Inilah kami. Jadilah bagian dari perubahan masa baru Indonesia. Silakan Anda datang membawa teknologi dan modal. Biarkanlah kami yang akan mengurus perizinannya. Semuanya ini kita lakukan dalam bentuk kolaborasi yang positif untuk saling menguntungkan.
Welcome back to our discussion on expanding investment amid geopolitical conflicts. We have learned about the challenges and that is faced by the government to encourage investments in Indonesia this year and our achievements this year as well. Now we will dive deeper into what awaits businesses in the coming year and what are the strategic steps that the government are going to take to boost the flow of investment in Indonesia. We're back with our speakers right now. Perhaps for Pak Andry, what are the possible crises that await us in the future, and how will those crises affect the amount of foreign direct investment and domestic direct investment in Indonesia?
Yeah, I think Pak Indra already mentioned about what's actually major troubles or crisis in 2023. What I see, I think, the basic factor is coming from the geopolitics, of course. Indra already mentioned as well. So the geopolitics actually made everything change. What we already assume, for example, when we enter 2022, suddenly we have to adjust. Actually, back to before we discuss 2023, I'd like to discuss about that. Indonesia have many positive factors. Number one, actually Indonesia has a relatively stronger economic growth in the last 5 years. For example, even during the pandemic crisis in 2020, that's number one. Number two, actually the government's policy and also together with the local government policy can manage the inflation rate in Indonesia. Yes, our inflation rate in 2022 is actually going up, because of the subsidized fuel price hike. But actually, it's right now what most interesting is because of governments can manage the staple food prices, the inflation rate in 2022 actually going down below what most economists and analysts expected. So for example, before, many analysts actually predicted Indonesia's inflation rate could go up by more than 6.5% to 7%, for example. Now we are seeing below 6%. And going down again in 2023, we are seeing that the Indonesia's inflation rate will go down only by around 4%. So it's a positive factor. Why positive? Because now we can manage the purchasing power of Indonesian people. That's number two. Number three, what most important is actually the coordination, policy coordination. That's actually what many people ignore in many times actually. It thinks that it is actually take it for granted for the better Indonesian economic growth, but it is actually some part of it because of the policy coordination between the authority monetary, fiscal, and also from the Ministry of Investment to building Indonesia's economy relatively stable. That's in 2022. 2023, I think we are seeing that the economic growth will experience a recession in advanced countries. Yeah. Slower growth in emerging markets, for example, in Indonesia, and also another ASEAN countries, for example, Malaysia, Thailand will experience a slower growth. And number three, inflation rate, of course, inflation rate is still going up, but I think in the second half, the inflation rate will subdue again. And last but not least, of course, the interest rate. Yeah. Rising interest rate environment or high interest rate environment since the second half 2022 and continued in first half 2023, of course, now is expected to be slower or lower in 2023 second half. So that's actually becoming our opportunity instead of possible crisis. Now, what's the impact for Indonesia? Of course, when every major countries, for example, experiencing for a recession, the direct impact will go to the trade and also the investment appetite. But what we see actually, Indonesia still has the opportunity because we are, like I mentioned before, we still at comparison to other countries, we still have positive indicators. In fact, in the next 5 or to 10 years, we can see Indonesia's economic growth could go at around 5% economic growth, for example, and manageable inflation rate at around 3%. So the situation, I think, is very difficult to find in another countries. Yeah. So that's actually the opportunity. Of course, for the business sector, we'll experience a rising costs. Yeah, that's actually now for me. Yeah. The big narrative for the business sector is how to manage the costs, yeah, more efficient and always at the market is actually the answer, yeah, how to tackle down. I think this kind of situation will not prolong, yeah. I think only in 6 to 1 year, 6 months to 1 year, and then after that is going back again. So when the situation is going down, you enter one country to for example, to invest, you can harvest in another years, for example. So that's what I see, yeah, from 2023.
Okay, so you're seeing a mix of optimism and also a little bit of other indicators that businesses are supposed to look out for. Exactly.
I think right now, yeah, we have to manage the situation in the first half of 2023, yeah, because now we are not seeing anymore the 2022. We're seeing the 2023. What I see actually in 2023, there is a flipping situation could go in 2023. Yeah, for example, in the second half, the inflation going down because of the recession and because of the slower demand. But at the same time, interest rate is going down. The energy prices could going down. So it will, give the positive benefit, yeah, positive situation for the business sectors, because now they can lower the cost and they can think now to manage to invest more or to expand the market. From what we saw, what we saw from last crisis, for example, yeah, the people or the business players that can manage the situation during the crisis or even expand, yeah, during the crisis, and then they will harvest in after that because they can get lower cost to invest at that time. So that's the situation.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Andry. Are you seeing that those predicaments apply to all business sectors, or are some industries are going to be hit hardest compared to the others?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think now, of course, the sectors that really affected will be coming from the export-related manufacturers, for example. But other than that, they will have still a positive situation, like what we see during the pandemic crisis 2020. So there will be the winners and the losers, but what we see from the losers is actually not quite long. Yeah, I think they have to manage it around 6 months to 1 year in battling the lower demand. So there are two kind of industries that will be affected from the volatility. Number one is that the industries that will be affected because higher costs. For example, the cement industries, the fertilizer, the pharmaceuticals, because many of their raw materials are imported from others. So they're exposed because of the rising rate and also rising the currency depreciation. And the second one, I think, they will be affected because of lower demand. So that's, for example, for the textile or garment industries, and for example the furnitures one. So that's actually because of the slower demand. But I think the cycle of the slower or the recession is not going very long this time. So the situation is the indicator is still there.
Okay, so we make to make sure that everyone is safe and sound in the first half.
Yeah, exactly. I forgot to mention the positive sectors. For example, the food and beverages, the nickel downstreaming, the industrial estate, the telco one, and also the manufacturing industries. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Pak Andry. Perhaps for Pak Indra, Pak Andry has explained quite a lot of interesting figures and interesting indicators for next year's condition in several industries. And perhaps what has the government will do to mitigate or brace the industries for next year expected economic uncertainty?
Yeah, of course. The first and foremost is continuing the reform. In terms of simplifying the procedures, and also making it more attractive to invest in this country. Apart from that is to make sure that we are with the business sectors all the way. We have to be with them, whether in the bad times or in the good times, in the sense that we are extending our facilitation, our assistance for those who encountered some problems. So in addition to get the new investor, we have to pay attention for the existing one. They've been here for quite some time. They've been spending a lot of money, so we have to appreciate them. We have to assist them, we have to facilitate them, we have to help them. So we have to do some debottlenecking. So we have to do some problem solving for them. That is, I think, what the government should do next year.
Okay. What more can be done to lessen the negative impacts? Like you've talked about preventing those negative impacts, like perhaps, but if there are already existing challenges, perhaps you can share with us what are those challenges and how the government plans to address those challenges.
Yeah, I look at the complaint that addressed to my office and see what we can do to help them mitigate or addressing those who encounter some problem, as you ask. The first one is a land-related problem. So that is the most on top of their list of complaints. So we have to help them to solve that land-related problems, whether they met the wrong person or they're not successful of getting the the paperwork and the necessary license, we have to speed up those kind of process. The second one that we can help to mitigate is in the policy. I think gone are the days that there's a ever-changing policy that confusing people. So we have to be firm to implement the existing policy in a very consistent way. The third one is that what we can do to lessen the impact is help them to overcome the difficulty in processing the license. Again, that is the top three things that government can do to lessen the impact of the hardship that probably we encounter next year. In addition to the macroeconomic policies expedited by the government.
Okay, thank you so much for your really insightful answer. Perhaps to Pa Andry, we are going to jump a little bit about decarbonization efforts. Perhaps, how can we ensure that investment that are pouring in Indonesia won't result in a setback in decarbonization efforts? And is it possible for us to start a shifting to green investments now, considering current situation?
Yeah, I think it is the right time, yeah, for any investors to come in Indonesia to think about the green economy. Yeah, like Pak Minister mentioned about how we ensure that Indonesia's investment going forward is actually based on the green economy principles. Yeah, so I think the government already set up, yeah, and all the regulations and also the supports, yeah, so that any investors in Indonesia is going to be comply on that, yeah. And I think the green economy or the green sector, ESG-based sector, is actually going to be the future source of growth, yeah, in Indonesia outside of the digital. We've talking about digitalization or digital economy already in many years, yeah. And right now, I think we have to be more serious on it. So. I think the Ministry of Investment already set up, yeah, all the supports, yeah, for the green investment to coming into Indonesia, and the potential is there, yeah, for Indonesia becoming one of the hotspot, yeah, for investment in green base, yeah. I think another factor that we have to set up is, I think, to be at par, yeah, with advanced countries in the sense in terms of the reporting, for example, how the investors reports to be based on the ESG principles, for example. That's, I think, many investors and also many people doesn't really understand still, yeah. Based on our survey conducted in Mandiri Institute, yeah, that they're aware about the ESG and green investment, but not many things that this is actually enough information about it. So I think when we can educate and like the financial inclusion issues, yeah, I think the ESG needs also to be boosted by the government to be aware, yeah, by the people and investors. So that's. But the potential is there because we are one of the biggest country with the potential thermal and also the wind turbine and so on and so forth.
Okay, it's interesting that you mentioned about the lack of data to encourage ESG investment in Indonesia. How do you see that field improving in the last 3 years, and what's the future going to look like? Do you see like already an uptrend in perhaps in the government or in businesses to improve that set of data?
Yeah, about the data, I think everyone is now aware. Yeah, but when we take a look on the compare it to the total number, yeah, I think it's still relatively low. Yeah, we still have to be more aggressive in data gathering and also the reporting system awareness. Yeah, we have to also boost it on that because what we saw from our report, for example, is I think people still think that reporting based on the ESG, for example, principle is costly, so that they're trying to avoid on this and trying to avoid the green investment, for example, because it's costly. They have to go, for example, based on our discussion on FMCG players that really comply on the green or ESG report, for example, they have to enter a more premium market, because it's, we cannot just go enter the normal market, but we have to add cost for that to be compliant. So we have to enter with the more expensive prices. I think that's actually what the government to also how to support this. So the reporting, for example, and ESG related doesn't have to be cost more for the companies.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Andry. Perhaps for Pak Indra, apart from the investment incentives, what are other policies or actions that can be implemented to strengthen our industries and promote their investment value for now?
Yeah, our focus going forward is value added. Value added. We are so focused on that. So after several years, we struggle with the competitiveness. We are right now struggling to move ahead with how to create value added. And we will do whatever we can to improve the situation for the industry to enter the market that is a more value additive type of their product. So they are moving in line with the government priorities. Of course, incentive will be available. We're thinking of bringing more and more attractive incentive. We are thinking of creating beyond tax incentive. Something like a non-tax incentive, but also making it easier for them to operate. In addition to the traditional incentive, like for example tax holiday, tax allowance, and import duty exemption, something like that. So we are thinking of go beyond that. All the way to help the business sectors carry forward the expansion. We also identify the stages where the business player are in right now, so we can customize the incentive and the assistance for them in each sectors. Some business sectors are in the construction phase, some are in the production phase, some are in the commercial phase, some are in the expansion phase. So each of those phases that needs different type of incentive. So we need to identify exactly what do they need in each step of the way of the production. So by doing that, we will be with them all the way from end to end.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Indra. Perhaps we'll circle back to the previous question regarding the ESG reporting in Indonesia and your take on it. Like perhaps, how do you perceive it has been going in Indonesia, and what is the way forward look like?
Yeah, the data problem. The easiest way to overcome that data problem is hire consultant. And right now, hiring consultant in the ESG is very expensive. That also causing an increase in costs. And where you become costly, you're not competitive anymore. That is a great challenge for the ESG movement. So this movement, the ESG movement, is very important, very strategic, and very timely. Why? because Indonesia have targets of emission reductions. We even enhance our target from 29% of emission reduction into 31%. So that's a big commitment. That's a big promise from Indonesia. And right now we are entering a situation how to change words into deeds, how to change rhetorics into concrete actions. And that is where the action is. We have to be more specific into how to reduce our emissions. We have a big and serious and ambitious program of early retirement of coal-fired power plants. And already Indonesia has successfully secured almost $20 billion commitment from countries to help Indonesia expedite this process of early retirement of coal-fired power plants. And not long ago, 3-4 months ago, we have seen the first electric vehicle made in Indonesia in Jakarta's roads. So this is the first time we see that. The first of its kind in Southeast Asia, the first of its kind in this country. So more to come with many other manufacturers. Next year, we aim to have the lithium battery factories in Central Java having a groundbreaking. So we move forward with that path or trajectory toward our net zero. It's just like that we have to be more specific and we'll be more concrete from word to action.
It is really interesting that you mentioned that how optimistic are you about us getting to that point where we can transition from words to action in Indonesia? Like, is it going to happen like anytime soon? According to your observation about like what we've already implemented so far?
Yeah, the things that I mentioned, like the early retirement of coal-fired power plants and then the electric vehicles, is originally scheduled sometimes in 2028, 2030, and 2035. But all of that are happening now. So we kind of pull the futures into now. So I think there is some degree of optimism in navigating or in traveling to our path to the net zero. Like I mentioned, we dream to have the electric vehicle by maybe 2028 at the latest. But we have it already right now. So we keep on trying to accelerate our program, and it's happening, and I think Indonesia can do that.
Okay, thank you so much. So if there's a will, there's a way for Indonesia to transition to net zero. And perhaps the same question for you as well that I already asked Pak Andry. Looking forward to 2023, which industries do you think would have the most potential to grow in terms of investment?
The sectors that I think from the investment perspective is, I think, the same sectors that also thrive in 3 years ago. That is the basic metals. And then secondly is the special economic zone, industrial zone, and also the mining to produce of those basic metals, and also the utilities that support them, and also the transportation, telecommunication, storage. I think those top 5 will thrive in the years to come.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak. Let's put a pin on the previous answers as we're now getting ready to move on to the next session. But before that, I'd like to again remind viewers to fill in the feedback form using the QR code or the link that we've provided in the chat box. Also, please send in your questions through the Q&A box in Zoom, and don't forget to mention the name of the panelist you'd like to ask. And now, a word from our sponsor.
Indonesia, your investment destination. The world's 10th largest economy is busy transforming, ready to be your business partner. With a robust talent pool, politically and economically stable and strong policies. Being the powerhouse, Indonesia is confirmed by the G20 presidency, bringing opportunities for you. Invest Indonesia now.
Thank you for staying with us. Now we've come to the most awaited part of this webinar. We've received numerous interesting questions in the Q&A box, and we are more than happy to answer them together with our panelists. For the first question, for both Pak Andry and Pak Indra, as we're still fresh from G20, what were the deliverables that came out of the event in terms of foreign direct investment?
Yeah, overall, the result from the G20, they have very encouraging takeaways. We've come up with the declaration, leaders' declarations. It's higher than just a chair statement. That is something that we have to be proud of. Secondly, and also some commitment from the major countries, like I said before, to support Indonesia in the path toward the net zero by supporting around $20 billion in early retirement of coal-fired power plants. And then we signed lots of agreements, lots of memorandum of understanding with various parties amounting to billions of US dollars in collaboration among the member of the G20. And we also have lots of bilateral talks, bilateral follow-up talks, and also lots of showcase of electric vehicle, electric buses, electric motorcycles. That's the result of the collaboration among the member countries. We have a quite successful B20 summit that also generate lots of transactions, concrete transactions in various sectors. And I think we can have a lot of more active collaboration among the G20 members.
Okay, perhaps onto the next question. It's still related to the 2023 outlook for Pak Andry. Will 2023 be a good year for local businesses, no matter the scale, to go global? What an investment perspective, what challenges will this process face?
Yeah, the basic the basic situation here for the global in 2023 is that we're still seeing the geopolitical issues, and we don't expect that the geopolitical issues to be, growing to other regions, for example, to China versus U.S. in terms of Taiwan, for example, because that will affect more for Indonesia business players. How's the effect of that geopolitical? Of course, it will bring much higher container costs, for example, logistic costs, and the supply chain disruption. It's already happened in 2022 for Indonesia manufacturers, especially for the electronics and automotives. For example, when you ask about how's the demand for the automotive in Indonesia, for example, the demand is still good. It's still strong, actually. So the problem is not coming from the demand, but also the supply side. So now back to your question about how's actually the situation. Yeah, of course we have to manage the situation in the short term. Yeah, like I mentioned, around 6 months, around first half of the year, because at the time the expectation of the interest rate is still going up. Yeah, because the Fed, yeah, the U.S. central bank still be expected to increase another 50 to 75 bips, for example, of their benchmark rate. And interestingly, after that, yeah, the market expected that they will cut again, yeah, in the second half of 2023 because of the recession situation. I think it also applies to Indonesia sector. So when you ask about what's the situation, I think it's relatively mixed, yeah, between the first half and also the second half in 2023. We have to be, the business players, the investors have to tackle all the rising cost situation in that area, but still have to be, at the market, because we have to manage. For example, when we offer pricing, because we miss the expectation of the interest rate, we will lose in the second half, for example, because the second half, the interest rate, the inflation will be going down. So that's actually what we have to manage. Now, how to tackle all the situation? I think number one is be efficient, of course, yeah, for the investors. Yeah, Ministry of Finance already managed not adding for many more costs, for example, because the licensing now is relatively cheaper, for example, compared to the past, yeah, for example. And the second one, I think you have to do the stress testing, yeah, for your balance sheet, for example. Just do a simple stress test. Yeah, for example, what if we have a difficult situation because of supply chain disruption? What affect to our business? What affect to our expansions going forward? Yeah. And number two, what if, for example, the rupiah depreciation, for example, exceeding just like what we have today, for example, what's the impact on our bottom line? So that's actually the situation. But other than that, actually, we still have many opportunities for investors to come into Indonesia. Like Pak Indra mentioned once again, yeah, we offer the downstreaming of the metal mining. We have a very strong actually market for the food and beverages, and also it can be exported as well. And number three, we still have a good industry in the automotive, for example, can be exported to Australia, for example. Number four, we have a growing digital economy. And number five, not to forget, also ESG related sectors is growing. Yeah, of course, for example, the coal producer right now think about how to shift their focus on not just producing and exporting the coal base. Yeah, but also they have to how to do downstream the coal into gas, for example. So that's a good opportunity or direct investment coming from domestic or even to the foreign investors. So that's
okay. Perhaps to add a little bit, we talked about what it's going to be like for businesses who wanted to go abroad next year. Perhaps we'll circle back to what will happen in the domestic condition. Perhaps for Pak Indra, what kind of help or subsidies that the government can provide for medium and MSMEs as they make up 60% of the economy?
Yeah. MSE accounted for a substantial number in terms of contribution to GDP and also the number of business establishment. It's almost 98% of our business and establishment in Indonesia are SME. So they make up a big and substantial amount of numbers to our economy. Right now, the lending rate to the SME is not proportionately appropriate for them. I think it's still small. We have to increase the lending rate portion to the SMEs vis-a-vis the corporate sectors. So, and then we are also thinking about this interest rate subsidies for the small and medium loan. So that is also the big push for the SME, and also the SME sectors right now also having some sort of big push also, as well as from the non-financial items such as the ease of doing business in terms of right now, like most of the SMEs are informal. They can't have access to bank loans. They even have some difficulty to open a bank account. By having a formal status, they are right now have a bigger access to the bank loan and other facilities. So we are right now make the formality or the formalization of the SME becoming much more easier for them to be included as a bankable business institution. That's really a big push for them.
Okay, thank you so much. We've already talked about like the condition right now and the challenges. Perhaps it is going to be interesting to talk about how Indonesia compare to overseas investment, and are there any ways to be on par with them? Perhaps for Pak Andry?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like I mentioned many times. So we have a good condition. Yeah, we have good macro indicators. We have good policy coordinations. Of course, that's actually what the investors need, yeah, from to invest in one country. Yeah, and I think when we can assure about the law enforcement, about the policy coordination, yeah, I think it's beyond the incentive, yeah, the government's incentive, yeah. When we can assure that, yeah, for example, because Indonesia is relatively unique, yeah, in terms of the decentralization, yeah, because when we show the another emerging market, I think Indonesia is relatively different in that. So when we can assure, for example, the policy coordination, and it's actually already proven, yeah, by the current investment performance, yeah. Going forward, I think investor will be relatively more confident on that. Yeah, they only have to, for example, processing the license to Ministry of Investment, and doesn't have any other investment licensing from other ministries and also from other regional government, for example. So that's actually what we can par to other countries, number one. Number two, I think also, like I mentioned in previous answer, yeah, I think right now we have to build, yeah, a strong talents, yeah, a strong human capital, yeah, strong education, yeah, not only for a good structural situation going forward in the next 20 or 10 or 20 years, for example, 2045, but also to be needed, yeah, by the investors, yeah, because investors, of course, need the human capital or needs talents to boost their investment here, yeah. For example, take a look on India or Vietnam or Malaysia even, yeah, for example, they have a strong talents and they have a strong human capital. So that's actually what we have to be par at, so that the investment going forward will be at par again with another country in the emerging market. I think if we can have those two, for example, in 1 or 2, 3 years, I think we can at par with other countries.
Okay, so that's very interesting insight and optimism for Indonesia for next year. Perhaps for the last question for Pak Indra, this is a very interesting question. Are we still accepting investment that are not considered green at the moment? And what, perhaps you can elaborate more about that.
investment in green. Yeah. In Ministry of Investment data, we don't classify it a clear-cut green and non-green. But if you don't do something good for the environment, nobody will buy your products. And we will strengthen the licensing on the environmental permits. So it is very tight regulation on that. So being green is not only for doing good for the planet, but also good for your profit. Because if you are well known as not doing good for the planet, nobody will see you. Nobody will buy your products. Right now, many parts of the world demand more stringent and more what you call that, an active consideration towards SDG related, ESG related. It's not like just a trend, but it is, I think, the necessity for us to create a more livable place for human being, for all of us, for our children and grandchildren. But that practice have also be interpreted as also good for your corporate actions. So it has to be good also for your financial situations. It has also to be good for your procurement problem. It has to be good for your supply chain environment, for your ecosystem. So it's kind of creating a balance between people, profit, and planet. Something like that.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much again for your elaboration on that, because that's a very interesting question, because Pak Andry previously said quite a lot about ESG investing in Indonesia. And quite interestingly, you mentioned a little bit about how ESG reporting is costly for Indonesian businesses right now. How can we control this price for as investors?
It's a tough question. How we control? Yeah, I think it's very difficult to control when the supply is not. For example, I think that Pak Indra mentioned about the invite the people that understand about the ESG related, yeah. But with the limited supply from the advisor, of course, it will bring to a very expensive one, yeah, to be implemented or to be used, yeah, by the company. I think that's what the government have to also support, is actually what's the people that actually can certain do the certificate or anything, yeah, related to that, and give advice many more, yeah. I think that can bring down, yeah, the cost in the sense that to be in the reporting only, yeah, in the reporting side only, yeah. But with the product, of course, we have to understand about the advisor, yeah, the people that really understand about what's the really ESG base, yeah, quality, for example. So adding more to the supply on how the people understand about it, and also the data. I think the limitation of the data create more expensive one, yeah, in that. So when we can share all the data related to the ESG, for example, yeah, I think it can bring down all the costs on that. Yeah, that's the answer. Okay.
Interestingly,
so the data decentralization, yeah, the data decentralization. So it applies not only for the real sectors, but also to the financial sector as well.
And we already discussed a little bit about the lack of data in ESG investing. And do you think that this will result in a setback in decarbonization in the long run? How significant will it impact our efforts to decarbonization in Indonesia? And is it possible for us to start shifting to green investments as of now?
Yeah, I see that because of the pandemic and because of the war in Ukraine, our path, our journey toward the net zero right now experiencing some delay, right? And also probably some detour because we have been so busy right now with short-term pressure. That's why during the COP26 in Glasgow, the organizers used the coal-fired power plants to light up the bulb, light up the light there for a conference of the Earth Climate Summit. You could imagine. That is the short-term necessity. That's why I said that the road to the net zero is somehow a little bit delayed. Last year, the investment in the renewables from the target 5 billion only realized 2.5, due to also some short-term problems. That's bring me into the notion that at least we have 3 problems that we have to address moving forward in this net zero and also pushing up to the green investment. First is the problem of measurement, including the data.
Yeah.
We need to know where we are now. We need to know to measure progress. That's is talking about measurement. The recent effort by OJK with their green taxonomy, and then Bappenas with index ekonomi hijau, and then BKPM recently with panduan ekonomi lestari, the sustainable investment guidelines, is a help, is the kind of effort in that direction. So it might help for the measurement that we badly need to move forward. Secondly is the motivation. Some regions who are really heavily dependent on fossil fuels don't really have that much of motivation to join the movement. So we need to also try to encourage them to move ahead, to change into a much more cleaner energy via subsidies and also assistance. And thirdly is the literacy. How many do you think people that understand what is net zero mean? What is net sink mean? What is trajectory or green framework means? What is actually sukuk green bond means? Something. Not many people understand that actually. So we need to improve the literacy, because increased literacy means compliance. So that is, I think, the 3 problems that we need to address in this issue.
Please, Pak Indra.
I can add, yeah. This is very interesting because we just launched a report related to what's the view from fund manager, retail investor, listed companies, and non-listed companies, together with the Indonesia Stock Exchange. We do a survey to those. The result is quite interesting. So, for example, about the opportunities and challenges, when we ask about the fund manager, more than half, or around 56%, of the fund manager surveys believe that ESG investment will be priority. 78% of fund managers surveyed over ESG fund. But when we talk about the challenges, 61% of fund managers surveyed find understanding ESG as a challenge still. This is domestic one. 94% expressed that lack of quantitative data on ESG become the main hurdle. So that's from the fund managers. What about from the retail sectors? It's very, very interesting. 75% of non-listed companies consider ESG in main business practices. Majority of non-listed companies focus on environment and social aspect of ESG. So not only environment. The challenge is one is actually only 24% of listed companies view ESG business practices will be priority. That's because of the cost. 45% find lack of understanding ESG issues as a challenge. That's actually what Pak Indra mentioned. It's in line actually. And the majority, 77%, do not use ESG rating as a benchmark for ESG implementation. So that's actually, I think, the room for Indonesia's ESG and green economy to grow is very huge actually. We have to, to sort of just tackling down the gap, in terms of the data, in terms of the knowledge, in terms of many things, so that all of the parties actually really understand and really take it not as a challenge. So one more thing about the retail investors. This is very unique, 41% believe ESG investment will be priority. So that's for the retail investors. So when we want to increase the awareness related to ESG to retail investors, I think the room is still huge. 47% of the respondents will invest in ESG related estate instrument if the return, if the return is around 3 to 5% higher than risk-free instrument. Means that they still think ESG, you are an ESG-based instrument, so I will ask you a much higher return than the conventional one. So that's actually the situation right now. The challenge is one, the 70% of retail investors find lack of information and data is a challenge. 70% one. So the data and information is still there. Only 26% have invested in ESG products. So that's actually concluded what we are facing right now related to the ESG information, how we cascade, I think this is some sort of an early stages like what we face the financial inclusivity and financial literacy one. I think now we have to do the same thing for the ESG related one.
Okay, actually that data concludes really perfectly our discussion today about the ESG improvement in Indonesia and how it's progressing so far. So we've seen a lot of challenges but also opportunities for Indonesia to improve, of course. On that note, we must, there is actually another question. So more about the data actually. Are there any sectors that are not yet covered, the ESG data? So is there any industries that are not covered yet so far, or is it already equally covered as of today?
I don't have the data regarding to that, but as long as I know for the financial sectors, because I'm from the bank, it's already covered, But for the real sectors, I think many sector already covered, from the data for related to ESG. For example, I just discussed with the FMCG, the mining, of course, and I don't know whether in the telco, data, but I do believe they have, but I don't have the data right now for that.
Okay. Perhaps for both Pak Andry and Pak Indra can give us a closing statement. Perhaps Pak Andry and then Pak Indra.
Pak Indra first or Pak Andry?
Pak Andry. Pak Andry first.
Yes. Of course. When we are talking about the investment, I still believe that the one thing that we discussed earlier that reinstated that investment performance for Indonesia is very important right now. Even it is become more important and significant during the 2023 when everyone is just afraid of global recession. We still believe that Indonesia is having only I think domestic deceleration, domestic economic deceleration because of slower import demand, for example. But the investment, direct investment role for boosting Indonesia's economy will always be a significant factor for our economic growth and to grow even more sustainable going forward. don't just rely on the consumption, because consumption also derive as well because of many investment coming in. You can imagine that if you, for example, we only experience slow investment or performance, for example, of course the consumption will be drop again. So that's my one take, yeah, actually. Number two, I think, of course, we have to be optimism. Avoid the self-fulfilling prophecy right now, because what does it mean for the self-fulfilling prophecy? That because everyone is now afraid, for example, because of the recession risk, for example, now they're holding their consumption, they're holding the investment, doesn't want to expand because they're afraid, and now it's not becoming very good here for our economy, yeah, because now nobody want to expand and nobody want to invest. So for example, do the business as usual, but don't forget to mitigate the risk. Of course, that's the number two. What we have to note: mitigate the risk, knowing the market as always. Yeah, because the cycle can be changed very rapidly. For example, sometimes it's going up, sometimes going down. It's very fast, and the cycle of crisis is now very rapid. So I think understanding about the cycle is very important right now. And last but not least, I think be efficient. Yeah, in the situation like this. Yeah, when we want to expand, of course, we have to also mitigate. Yeah, that doesn't create more cost. Yeah, for the business players. Yeah, and do simple stress test if you don't have, for example, enough capabilities to do that. Yeah, just a simple what's the impact on that, on this and on that, yeah, on your bottom line, for example, so that you're not, for example, if you're knowing that you're good enough, so you can still expand actually, doing that. So that's my take. Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Andry. Pak Indra, please.
Yeah, recently in social media or in the conversation among friends, we have talked a lot about the recent articles in Economist magazine about Indonesia. About Indonesia. It says that Indonesia is back on the map, and in the next decade it will become more important. So there is some degree of optimism when people from outside looking inside to Indonesia. So going forward in 2023, I think the tone, as I mentioned, is the optimism with cautious, optimist tapi waspada. So with that, we need to move forward to the next year with optimism and with cautious as well. In addition to becoming efficient in every business step that you take, you need also to be resilient, that's ready for the future shocks, which will be happening more often and in a very shorter times. So you'll be ready when the future shocks are coming into you, and you'll be ready to adapt for the changing situation as well. So as one of the newspapers said that this era is the era of predictable unpredictability. So it's quite confusing term, predictable unpredictability. So the unpredictability will be with us always in the years to come. It's just a matter of how you adapt to it. So, and people who survive is somebody who can adapt to the change situation.
On that note, we must end today's discussion. We have unfortunately run out of time, so I would like to thank our guest speakers for their insights today. Thank you so much, Pak Indra and Pak Andry. I would also like to thank the investment ministries for supporting today's show. Also, to our participants, please don't forget to fill in the survey by scanning the QR code that appears on screen or by clicking the link in the chat box. If you're lucky, you will be given a free digital subscription of the Jakarta-Post for a month just by submitting your response. In the meantime, this is your host, Divya Kariza, signing off. Thank you.